So yeah, the answer is you're made of love. So I've got a story to tell. Um, this was back in 1997, when I was 13, and I'm not telling the story of my ND here because I've told that to death. Uh, but when I was 13, I had a near-death experience, and I lost my mother, so it was also very tragic, and there was a lot of grieving, immense grieving, and all the kinds of emotions that you have in that sort of thing. But curiously, in the 2 to 3 months after it, kind of basically the time of summer vacation, there were all sorts of interesting experiences of consciousness of life that really, if they may have been there to a certain extent in my very early childhood, but they I never experienced them as an adolescent and as an older kid. So there was a lot of stuff that I just couldn't put in a box. One of the experiences that was the most interesting to me was walking around, and I lived in a small town, basically seeing these giant columns of gold above everybody's head, and there was a sense that these columns, and it was also around them a little bit too, so kind of like that, almost like a bulbous funnel trying to flow into them. I could tell that it was trying to flow into them, but they weren't letting it in. And so I one day I just said, well, what is that? What are you? And the thing replied back, oh, I'm just love. You know, love didn't apply mentally, applied right here. It's like love. And then I saw a little bit deeper, and I realized, oh my God, I could almost see not quite arms, but a sense of pushing away all the time, effort, 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 effort. And then I realized, oh my God, that is how I had been trained to live as well. And I realized, oh my God, until recently that has been my only mode, or at least my primary mode, which is little breaks here and there. And for the first time since age 5 or age 6, I was able to experience life in a raw, unfiltered way. I was able to allow these just vast vast flows of blissful energy to move through my experience, even when, in many ways, I was absolutely crushed by the circumstances of life. And so I took a lot out of that, and then I forgot about it for a while. I tried to go back to be like a normal teenager, a normal person. I really did my best, actually, but it was, internally it felt like a miserable failure trying to do that, like putting on a size 6 shoe when I'm really a size 13. It was just very painful. And so years passed, and eventually there was this deep call inside to get into meditation, to rediscover what I knew in early childhood and what I knew in the aftermath of the NDE. And then it returned. And in finding this big, vast silence at the bottom of meditation, I also found all the love that I had thought had died with my mother was and had always been inside me the whole time, and inside everybody else. And having this fill out to all parts of my psyche, and I think my body and myself, this is also, I think, still an ongoing project. But it's very much the case. Where there's silence, and when I mean silence, I don't mean just the absence of noise. I'm trying to put a word, like everybody else does, to a dimension of experience that you really can't put words onto. It's ineffable. So we could call it silence, we could call it stillness, call it fullness, call it emptiness. All those words are attempts at describing the same kind of place where the past falls away, worry about the future falls away. We find ourselves, in what Abraham Maslow called the peak experience. Well, I might be butchering Maslow a little bit, and I don't want to do that. But I really do think that the core of the peak experience that he's describing, that he's collecting from people's experience, is in fact the same as samadhi, is in fact the same as the Christian peace that passes all understanding. So when we find that, that's where the love is. When you find that stream, you don't have to go anywhere else. When you find that stream inside you and you keep going back to it, going back, even if you try to get it from people and changeable things out of habit, get burnt by putting your hand on the stove, you just keep going back. And as you do that, you start to find it everywhere. Some people see things, other people don't. You don't have to. But you might feel it. You might look at a tree with totally innocent eyes that have been scrubbed by silence. And in that tree, you see an eternity. In that tree, in your heart or in your body, you get a sense of this big vastness, this fullness that's beyond, that's more real than what we think of as reality. And that's all this is. We're just kind of immersing ourselves more and more and more. We are soaking the mind in silence. We're soaking the psychology in silence. We're soaking the body in silence. And little by little, or sometimes lot by lot, those things are healed. And they return to a much easier homeostasis. And again, I'm reminded about the folks that I would see in my little small town in Wisconsin. Really lovely folks, but and the sense of all of us, without knowing it, all those years that I was growing up, we were just hitting ourselves. We were just hitting ourselves on the head with a hammer. We were, oddly, in our quest to try to be happy, often we were doing it in a very backwards way. We were trying to control, we were trying to push away, we were trying to, get what's ours, and all the time, all the while, all we had to do was just learn how to relax again. Learn how to take the mind back into silence. That's it. And, we might not become, big words, enlightened or self-realized. Those are often just very ill-defined words. These days everybody means a different sort of thing when they say it. That might not happen in a day, but it doesn't have to take 50 years or 20 years or 10 years. And we get results right away every time we touch that profound silence, whether it's for a millisecond or a few seconds or for a minute. We're making a dent. So, how did I do that? I used a lot of different techniques. I think I was a fan of the everything, including the kitchen sink approach. Just try. In the 1990s, and when the internet wasn't so vast or fast, in a small town in Wisconsin, you kind of gotta, make do, and you know that you've got the library, and you've got sometimes a trip to the bigger city to a Barnes and Noble, and you just Grace is going to meet you in the ways it needs to. But I did a lot of different techniques. Eventually, I settled in on an effortless meditation technique, which was almost anathema to what I thought was required at the time. And so I did this effortless technique called the Ashaya's Ascension. And that, for me, was 0 to samadhi in 60 seconds. So I think I'll leave it for there. This is really, I think, the first YouTube video I've ever made. So I'll give you a little view of where I'm sitting here. This is welcome to Portugal. Have a good evening.